Now there's another video that I'm publishing around the same time as this one, and it's showing off what my latest time lapse is. In this video, I wanted to just go into a little bit of behind the scenes in as far as how I made it. Now I've been making time lapse on and off for a year. It's not something that I've really been doing seriously, but it is something that is just fun to do. I don't do very many of them because, of course, they take a lot of time. And during that time, my cameras and other equipment are tied up and I can't use them for other things and other events. So these are few and far between. Now for this latest time lapse, I was just growing cabbage. And I chose cabbage because this is winter time and that is like a good cold weather plant. So that's the one I went with. Now in the time lapse, you'll see it growing in this tray. This is actually the same tray that I used. I've already transplanted all of the cabbage and I've given some of it away. And I just had the tray sitting on top of an aquarium that hasn't been used forever and a day. You'll be able to make out some black felt that is taped around this aquarium. There's another time-lapse experiment I had done with this, and that's why all the black felt is here. And I just never removed that, so it's still here. But for this time-lapse, I just set the seed tray on top of the aquarium. And there's a black poster board that is behind it. Now, if you look very carefully, I think in the first few frames of my time lapse, I did not have this back poster board here. And so you could actually see the wall there. On this other part, I have this other black, I don't know what material this is, but you can see it's very see-through. There's my network closet in there with cables galore that need to be cleared up. Now, while the time lapse was recording, I do have a C-stand that's up here, and I had put a light on it, and that's how I kept things primarily illuminated. There was a secondary light, not something I was really seeking to use, but it was already clamped to the table, so at some point I just went ahead and turned it on. But this is just the physical setup that I use. Let's actually go to the photographic equipment. For lighting, I used a light that was a variation of one of these. This is just a very generic video light. I had one that was hanging out, I think it was probably about a foot above the plants, but that's how I kept things illuminated most of the time. There is a point at the video at which I turned this off just because I wanted to do an experiment with the day-night cycle. That didn't work out how I wanted it to, so I did not do that throughout, but you will see the video get dim at one point, and that's simply because I had either turned this video off or I had turned it down. I can't remember which I had done. Now sitting over here on another table, I have some of the other equipment that I had used. So you can see there's two cameras here. Actually, I'm missing something. Let me go get it. Sitting on this table, I have some of the other equipment that I used. So there's a total of 3 cameras here and some other pieces. So let's go through each one of these and talk about how it was used. Now, the GoPro, I had capturing footage at a couple of points. It was capturing footage throughout. I ended up not using that footage in the main video. I thought I was going to also include a section where I had a little time lapse of the sky, but I had used a GoPro for that. But that was omitted too. One of the things about the GoPro is when it comes to time lapses, this is probably one of the more reliable and durable cameras that I have, at least at this time of the year. One of the drawbacks that it has is that these things don't seem to tolerate higher temperatures very well, and they seem to produce a lot of heat. So when I tried doing some time lapse throughout the summer, I had problems with the GoPro just overheating and shutting down. And it was overheating not because of it being a hot day outside, but just because it's just a camera that runs hot. This is approaching winter time, so I can leave it out there now and the cooler temperatures will help it cool off even better. So I do have footage from my time lapse. It was not part of the final video, although I did put out another independent video that just had the GoPro video without any other editing done. Let's look at the other cameras. So for the other cameras, I have these 2 Canon SLRs. One is the 5D Mark III, and then this one is the 7D. Which variation is this? Okay, 7D Mark II. So these cameras very much look alike, but they do not work alike. The older one, which was the 5D Mark II, I actually found that was a more reliable setup than the 5D Mark III was more reliable than the 7D Mark II. And I'm not going to mention the marks from here on. It's just 7D and 5D from here on. For the first set of cabbage that you see growing, I was filming that with the 70. One of the problems that I had with the 70 is every so often, it seemed like every 10 to 14 hours, the camera would just shut off. Now, it wasn't a problem with the battery because I was actually using a dummy battery that was connected to an AC source. But I tried swapping that out from using the dummy battery to actually using a real battery. And I tried using a different dummy battery, but no matter what, this camera would just randomly shut off after so many hours. An advantage that it has is that camera has a built-in intervalometer, and we'll take a look at that in a second. The 70 was more reliable. I had no problems with it shutting off, but it does not have a built-in intervalometer, but that's not anything that's a big deal because here, this device is the intervalometer that I was using for filming. So is this even, yeah, the battery's going dead. At this point, it's been turned on, I think for, yeah, this one does not have an off switch. So it's pretty much been turned on for the past, actually it's a few days shy of a month. So yeah, you expect the batteries to go dead at some point within there. But for those that are not familiar with them, with this intervalometer, I could set you can set up some parameters for it taking times on some interval. For this one, I can tell it to take between 1 and 99 shots. If I go beyond 99, it will just do it infinitely until the battery completely goes dead. And you can tell it how many seconds to wait before taking the first shot, and then from there on, how much time to put between each one of the shots. So that's connected to the 5D. Not really using this shot, but I'll explain this anyway. This 5D has a cage on it, and that cage is just there so you can see that there's lots of other holes that are on the cage. And that is just there so that if I wanted to mount other things into the camera, or if I wanted to mount my camera in some unusual way, such as if I'm taking a portrait mode video, I could just mount it on a tripod sideways instead of straight up. Or I could also mount additional lighting, LCD monitors, whatever. That's why that's in the cage. I did not need to use a cage for the video, but I just keep that camera in a cage unless I'm going to be carrying it out and about for a while. This other hardware that I have, this was some of the mounting hardware that I use for the cameras. I use a regular tripod for the shots that were taken from the 5D. The Canon 70 was actually mounted on this. Now this is not a single product, this is actually a multitude of products. So let me disassemble it so you can see what composes this. So one of those items is the ball head itself, and so this is what the camera was sitting on, and of course I can use this for changing the angle which the camera is looking. I do not know what this piece is called, but I've got a couple of these, and this is just ever so convenient for mounting a camera at other angles to other hardware that I have. This is two pieces. This is a K-clamp, and then I have another attachment here so that I can screw things into it, and that's the screw that I use in order to attach the other rod. And I have no idea what someone calls these. I refer to these as pipe clamps. The first time I used one of these, I was mounting a camera to a pipe. But as you can see, it has a clamp that is made for attaching to a pipe or some other round surface, and then it has a 1/4-inch screw that's on the other side. I had the GoPro mounted on this, and then I had a GoPro attached. Then I had the GoPro attached to this other. Once again, I don't know what to call it, but that was more or less the setup that I had. So here we are looking at the menu on the 7D. I said that this had a built-in intervalometer, so I'm going to show you where that is. If you press the menu button, it'll start displaying the menu on the screen, and so from there, I know that it's somewhere in this first set of menu options, so let's find it. Okay, here it is, interval timer. So by default, it is disabled. Whenever you turn the camera on, it is always going to be disabled until you come and turn the setting itself on. So if I go in and enable it, it is now turned on. Let's go back into the settings. So here, you can see that I have it set to take a picture once every 15 seconds, and then it will take an unlimited number of shots. You can either tell it to take an unlimited number of shots, or you can tell it to take some number between 0 and 99. And so if everything works correctly, when you tell it unlimited, it'll just keep taking shots until the memory card is full, until the battery goes dead. Now, as far as memory goes, this entire time lapse ended up taking up a total of 200 gigs of all of the combined media on the card. I wasn't too concerned about memory. This camera still has a 256 gig card in it. Let's see how much the other one has. I believe this other one still has 2 memory cards in it, and when it gets full, it will automatically switch over to another. So yes, we have a compact flash card in here that has 128 gigs on it. And then we also have an SD card in here, and it has a capacity of 512 gigs. So as far as taking all the shots that I needed goes, I was not worried at all about the cameras running out. So we've got another 512 gigs within there. Now, one thing that is significantly different about the output from these is the GoPro. When you tell it to take a time-lapse video, the final file that you have is a video file. You don't need to do any other processing on that. You have your time-lapse and ready to go. For the other 2 cameras, what you end up with is a set of photographs. So I ended up with several folders that were full of photographs. Each one of those folders had 10,000 shots in it. Once it gets to 10,000 shots, you can't put any more photos in that folder, and so it will make a new shot. And then I had to import those into another piece of software in order to convert those from an image sequence or a sequence of image files into a video. And I'll show you how I did that. It's just really easy to do. So here I am on my MacBook Pro. This will work the exact same way if you're on Windows. The program I'm using is called DaVinci Resolve. And right now the project I have open is actually the one I'm using to edit this video that you're watching now. So I'm only going to do this temporarily. This is a collection of some of these shots. So you can see that this is an image sequence. If we start looking at the last 3 characters of the name, you can see this is 103, 104, 105, 106, and so on. And I actually have like several folders of these. Actually, let me not use the ones that are in the root. The ones that I have any set folders are more organized. Now I mentioned before you can only have like up to 10,000 shots per folder. That's part of the reason these are divided the way that they are. But sometimes when the camera died on me, I would also just go ahead and create a new folder so that I also had some type of marking for when I was starting a new image sequence. But in order to change this from an image sequence to a video, I can just select all of these, and if I click and drag them into DaVinci Resolve, it'll see that, hey, these have sequential file names. Even though I dragged a whole lot of files, how many was that anyway? Let's find out. Get info, I think this will count the files in there. Yeah, so it's counting the files. So that was a grouping of 1,279 pictures, total of 7.3 gigabytes. But it got brought in as a single sequence. If I double click on this, it opens that up. Now you can see the black bars that are on the side, and part of the reason for that is when I'm taking pictures, it uses the entirety of the center, which is not widescreen aspect ratio. I end up zooming in and cropping to make that fit into a video. But if I start advancing through the slides, you can see that this is like one of the very first sequences from where the seeds had just come up, and that's where it stops. So it's not very long. Actually, there's something else I'm going to point out in here. I had mentioned before that when I started off, I did not have the black background. If you look in the back right corner, you can see there's like a brown paper bag there, but then it goes to black. So I'm just pointing out where I did make a change within this video. But that brings in one sequence. This entire video was made of a lot of sequences. So you have to do this like for each and every group of sequence. Here it is after I've grabbed 3 sequence sets into the project. Let's take one of them and actually add it to a timeline. So create timeline using selected clip. And I'm just going to call this temp timeline. Okay, so here's the temp timeline. If I select this other set, and let's see, what do I want to do? I want this to be appended. Okay, so that should have added to the end. Same thing here. Okay, so now all of these sequences that I have imported are part of the same timeline, so they will play as a single video. So I just hit play, and you can see there it is playing back. I think I might have added these in the wrong order. I'm not going to worry about fixing that now. But one of the things that you'll see is there's not really a lot going on. I'm pausing it. Let's advance this manually. Okay, so when I advance it, so 2 things. I see I do have them in the wrong order. And when I advance it manually, you can actually make out the motion. So let's fix that too. Now if I advance through them, you can see where it starts off from the sprout. Then the camera actually loses, this is one of the areas where the camera went off, which is why it jumps from the smaller sprouts to the much larger sprouts. But that's the process that I followed all the way through in order to capture my pictures. And you don't really get a whole lot of pictures per day. Like I mentioned, it took 13 days and 200 gigs worth of files to collect all of the pictures that I did for the video that I made. I have a series of components sitting here on the floor, and this is for something else I wanted to try out. This doesn't play a role in any time lapse I just did, but it might end up being expressed in some future time lapse. One of the things I didn't like about my time lapse is all the plants are growing in towards wherever the light is. So in order to prevent that from happening, I'd have to either add more light so that they have more even lighting, get a different type of light, or an idea I had is if I could get my plants on some type of turntable, then I could have them rotating very slowly so that they get an even amount of light all around. Now I need to be able to make sure that the movement of the turntable is coordinated with the camera. So to test something out, I already had these parts here. These are not the most ideal parts, but I'm using them because they're here and I didn't want to, it didn't make sense to buy anything just for a quick prototype. So I have a Raspberry Pi over there that's controlling this whole thing. Of course, there's a power supply right here. This is a stepping motor controller. I don't actually need one this big for this motor, but once again, it was here, so it's what I've used. Now this is just a pipe fitting that I had. You can see that there's been some drilling within it. On the top, I have my makeshift platform. It is rolling on these wheels that are on bearings. These are actually some type of V-slot wheels. Not quite sure where I got these, but they were in the house. This screw is going into a stepping motor. To secure the stepping motor into the pipe, that's what these screws are for. I just have 4 screws in there that are held in place with some nuts, and I use that for a very quickly put together makeshift motor mount. Now, I'm glad I did an experiment with this before trying to make something that would have required more time, because right now this turntable is directly coupled to the motor. And it turns out that's not how I need to do things. This motor turns 1.8 degrees every time it gets a command to step. And one, that's actually too many degrees. I need to lower that with either some gearing or some pulleys. And two, with the way the motor turns, when I tell it to step, it will make that step really fast, then stop really fast. So that ends up resulting in some vibrations. So if I put something on here, it's not going to stay on there because it'll eventually vibrate itself off. I'll run the Python script I have that is controlling this so you can see what I mean. See, as long as it's moving, everything is fine, but whenever it either stops or starts, then you can see that there's slippage of this platform. So that will cause a real problem for me because one rotation of the platform, there it is slipping a lot. But one rotation of the platform is not necessarily one rotation of whatever I have that's sitting on it. I'll run that again with nothing on it so that you can see how, so that you can see what happens. So that's really where the vibrations come through. We're just taking one step at a time and stopping. And I had it doing this because I wanted to try and slow it down. But since it always takes a step at the same speed, I'm not really slowing it down. I have some other parts that I can use to try and make a solution for this. But that's not something that shows up in this video. I am also going to try and take some of these I don't know what you call them, but it's like some LED lighting where they're attached with a serial data connection where you can tell each light to change a different color. I think I might try to also construct an array made from ribbons of those lights, and then I can control the lighting and make sure that things are even on one side versus another. I could have one light setting that the plants would experience when there's no picture being taken, and during that fraction of a second whenever the picture is being taken, I'd be able to change the lighting. So that way, if I wanted to have something that is, say, much darker, I'd be able to accomplish that without causing my plants to suffer from not having enough lighting.